Thank you for the introduction. I'm Mamle Kabu, as she said, a writer, also a freelance consultant in social development issues. I was born in Ghana, and last year I celebrated 20 years back in Ghana after a stint in the UK. I'm quite happy to be back in Ghana. It's also very exciting to be a writer in Ghana today and to be part of a sort of rebirth, or well, not rebirth exactly, but a resurgence of writing in Ghana. And what I like most about that is that it's becoming less of an academic thing now. You know, in my childhood, it was only academics who read serious literature, and it was something to be studied at the university, and many of the writers were actually academics. And I think what's exciting about being a writer in Ghana now is that it's opening up to people in general, not just as an academic pursuit. My vision would be for that to happen even more, but with my background in development, I know that there are serious obstacles to that. And when I'm with writers, they often complain about the market for books and why people don't read in Ghana. And I like to remind people that about half the population couldn't read, even if they wanted to. It's not really a matter of what you want to read or not wanting to read this or that. It's actually a matter of not being able to, being illiterate. So there's half your market gone for starters, because in order to develop anything that's any sector of public interest, you need both a market and a supplier. And if you write and nobody is interested in reading your writing, it's not going to develop. So for me, a vision for literature in Ghana must include a vision for education in Ghana. Otherwise, you can forget about literature. I've conducted field research in all 10 regions of Ghana in the past 20 years. And one of the things that has haunted me the most is the waste of human resources. I've interacted with hundreds of children all over the country, from north to south, west to east. Children who have enormous potential. I've interviewed children so many times, and it's always exciting, but it can be so demoralizing as well, because you talk to them, you ask them, what do you want to be in the future? And they'll tell you, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a government minister. And you know, you research their community, and you know that there's probably no way they can ever be that thing that they want to be. And that's really heartbreaking. So it's one of the things that bothers me the most, actually, about development in Ghana. And giving voice to children like that was one of the things that inspired my story, The Kaya Girl, which is my first book for children. It's actually for young adults. And it's about two teenage girls from contrasting social backgrounds who become friends. And the poorer girl, who is a kayayo, that's a girl who carries headloads in the market, eventually rises above the richer girl in achievement when given access to similar resources. And speaking of rising, in preparation for this talk, I watched Chimamanda's presentation last week. And it got me watching a number of other TED Talks. You know how it is, you look over and end up spending the whole day. And I came across another TED Talk by Kwamna, the Ghanaian BBC journalist, entitled Telling the African Story. So I watched that one too. And Kwamna talked about Africa rising, this phenomenon of Africa coming up economically. Especially as reported in recent articles of that title in The Economist and Times magazines. He showed contrasting slides of images from Luanda, Angola, of great wealth side by side with great poverty. We have the same contrast here in Ghana, as I portrayed in the book, The Kaya Girl. Kwamna spoke of the need for balance in telling the African story, and ended with a proverb: until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter. This resonated with me because I see the problem from both angles. As a development researcher who is well acquainted with the skeletons in the cupboard of Africa Rising, or Ghana Rising, I get frustrated with that glossy image that obscures widening wealth disparities with flashy economic statistics. On the other hand, as a writer, I get fed up with the opposite image of Africa that has become closely associated with African writing and African literature. The poverty, conflict, depravity, deprivation, violence, what has been dubbed by some as poverty porn. I know these things are based on reality, but it's the emphasis that bothers me. Yes, there may be poverty and violence, but don't tell me there aren't also love stories and family dramas, mysteries and everyday human dilemmas. It's almost as if literature cannot be authentically African if it does not fit into the wallow of disempowerment, feeding into what Chimamanda would call a single story, an imbalanced story. It's worse than the lion not learning to write. It's as if the lion has learned to write and is writing the hunter's story. The proverb of the lion and the hunter demonstrates the power of words, of storytelling, of writing, as well as the responsibility that goes with it. It shows how important it is for us to develop our voices as African writers in a balanced way. As writers, we have the power to influence others and to speak out for those who can't. And we need to use that power to help them rise too, to find their own voices and their own power, like those children who want to be doctors and lawyers. So my vision for literature in Ghana means getting a lot closer to everyone being able to read and write, the basics, and everyone contributing as readers and writers to the development of a literature that's worthy of us because it reflects the full texture and complexity of our context and can serve as a platform for dialogue and change. Now to another power issue, women's rights. I agree with Chimamanda about the importance of women's rights. And according to the Oxford Dictionary definition of a feminist, which I took the trouble to look up, a feminist is an advocate or supporter of the rights and equality of women. I'm certainly of that conviction. I could not agree more that we all should be. And yet, having earlier referred to the power of words, I have to say that there is something about the word feminist that has always rubbed me the wrong way. Don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those, I support women's rights, but I'm not a feminist woman. I don't fear the word, despite all the baggage that has accumulated over the centuries. No, the problem is more fundamental than that, and I need a bit of audience participation to illustrate my point. Who can tell me what the term is for an advocate of men's rights? Go on, guys. I mean men as in males, not mankind. See? Why isn't there such a word? Because it's not needed. What I object to is the very existence of the word feminist. Like Chimamanda said, I question the premise. It's a branding. Why should women be branded just for wanting their rights? And with an ist word too. I don't know if it's only me, but most of the ist words I can think of are negative, like sexist, racist, fascist, terrorist, chauvinist. Feminist is not a friendly word. Many men find it unfriendly, but worse than that, it is not friendly to women. In the 19th century, an American physician came up with a name for a mental illness that caused black slaves to flee captivity. It was called drapetomania. It sounds like a joke. It's not a joke. In other words, a slave's desire for freedom became recognized as a medical condition, a sickness, and it had its cure and preventative measures, neither of which you really want to know about. Today, drapetomania is considered an example of pseudoscience and part of the edifice of scientific racism. The notion of something being wrong with you or different about you because you demand what is rightfully yours, and the labeling of that demand as an illness or a condition or a state of mind or a theory or an ism for short, to me just constitutes a handle that can be used to manipulate that right and take it away from you. That's my problem with the term feminism. It's like a hanger onto which notions of prejudice and misogyny and negativity can be attached, making it easy to dismiss. It is an empowerment tool that can turn into the means of disempowerment. For example, it's a lot easier to say, oh, don't mind her, she's just a feminist, than to say, oh, don't mind her, she just wants her rights respected, isn't it? If Chimamanda's friend had said to her, ah, you're a woman who insists on your rights, she would not have suffered a moment of doubt. She'd probably have taken a bow, rather than going in search of the dictionary, with associations of terrorism and other nasty isms in her mind. So I think we should keep the language simple and unequivocal, so that it cannot have its power taken away. This is particularly important here in Africa and in Ghana for a couple of reasons. One, because people are quick to attribute foreignness to big words, especially if they represent concepts that may not be welcomed. Oh, that feminism, it's a white people's thing, it's for white people. Yes, feminism as a theory may have come from abroad, but the need for women's rights to be respected is rooted in every human society, whether it is recognized or not. And here in Ghana, that need is so local and so important and so urgent that we can't afford to entertain any confusion over it. In comparison with other African countries, Ghana has chalked up some impressive advances in women's rights, but there is still a long way to go. National statistics on sexual abuse, domestic violence, early marriage and other harmful sociocultural practices, as well as on access to justice for girls and women affected by such abuses, are still nothing to brag about. Females, especially in the poorer sectors of society, are still dogged by inequitable access to resources, including land, property, education, and justice. The attitudes that keep these inequities in place are still deeply entrenched in our culture and society. I've experienced them myself on numerous occasions. Here are a few examples, all true stories. When I gave birth to my son, one of my uncles, by way of congratulation, said something to me that's a standard congratulation for women who have given birth to boys. He said, "Ofo numlo," which means in Krobo, my language, you have given birth to a human being. The fact that such a statement is considered a compliment to a woman, who presumably must not be a human being, demonstrate the extent to which her inferiority is culturally accepted. Another person, a queen mother who was educated, said to me, "You have proved that your husband is a man." And I thought, if you think I went through all that just to prove my husband's masculinity, you don't know me very well. There was a shop in Accra where I used to be a regular customer many years ago. The owner was well educated, she was very friendly, we used to chat at the counter. She knew my name very well because she always wrote it on my receipt. When I got married, she asked for my new name, eager to write it on the receipt for the first time. I told her there was no new name. What? She was incredulous. I told her I already had a perfectly good surname and saw no reason to throw it away. "That's disgusting," she said, not at all in jest. Strong language. On my subsequent shopping trip, she would inquire, pen hovering, if I was still using that name. Although she remained friendly in every other way, I had clearly committed a grievous sin in her book by not taking my husband's name. In the 19th century, Queen Victoria also used the word disgusting with reference to women's rights. Here is a quote from her. "I am most anxious to enlist everyone who can speak or write to join in checking this mad, wicked folly of women's rights. Feminists ought to get a good whipping. Were women to unsex themselves by claiming equality with men, they would become the most hateful, heathen, and disgusting of beings, and would surely perish without male protection." Now, as Queen of England, Empress of India, and the British Empire, Queen Victoria probably had little use for feminism, or any need to assert her rights. But how many of us are in that position? If Victoria could come back for a visit, she would find the females of England alive and kicking, despite claiming equality with men. And it all happened a lot quicker than she could ever have imagined. Women believing in their own inequity, their own inferiority, is the greatest thing holding them back from their rights. Accepting inequities and injustices as their natural lot in life, seeking power and resources through men, rather than developing their own power and capacity, writing the hunter's story rather than their own. taking the easy way out, which they often discover too late is no easy way out, rather than maximizing their own potential. Through these attitudes, women harm themselves more than men ever could. My vision for the advancement of women's rights in Ghana again begins with the basics, with education, because it involves girls and women all over the country becoming aware of and understanding their rights. This is the first step towards being able to claim them. And for those of us already aware of our rights, my vision is for us to believe in them and believe in ourselves, in our own power and potential. Women's rights are not about rejection of men, they're about equality with them, about sharing the world with them in a dignified and mutually respectful way. I would like us to claim these rights boldly because they belong to us and to our context, and to do so in simple, powerful language so that nobody can dismiss them as a foreign concept and take them away from us. Thank you.